Well, I want to thank the Friends of the Laurel for Patuxent Friends, as well as Friends of Patuxent, and especially our artists. I think they deserve another round of applause. I mean, this is an amazing piece of work. I mean, admittedly, I've never been to the Sistine Chapel or anything like that, but this certainly is at the top of my list for artwork now. I just wanted to thank them because I think this is a really impressive. My usual.
I'm glad I didn't do that.
For my next trick. Just, there you go. Thank you. Okay. On March 20, 2017, a man of unflagging I can't even read my own writing here. Of boundless energy, unflagging positivity, faith, and exceptional intellectual power passed away. Dr. Chandler S. Robbins. He was really a good friend of mine for many, many, many years. My first contact with him was when I was a teenager back in the 50s. He had a program to record first arrivals, last arrival of migrants, and this is primitive eBird, very primitive. And I became one of, I'm sure, 1,000 or more volunteers around the East Coast or Eastern U.S. who would fill in the dates of when we saw our first robin, so to speak, and send that back to him. I would periodically get a little note sometimes, or I would send a little note to him, thinking, of course, I was the only one communicating with him. And occasionally he would respond with usually nothing much. But eventually I went on through college and joined the Navy, and my destroyer went into Midway Island Atoll dock for a little liberty, so to speak, while the other officers and crew ran off to get some adult drinks, I think they're called, adult beverages. I took my binoculars and ran around this fabulous island to look at some of the 250,000, well, they weren't that many right then, but birds that nest on Midway. Mostly albatrosses, but many other shearwaters and other seabirds. And while I was walking around, I noticed there's this one little bird called the fairy tern, and it's a very small, less than a robin-sized bird, and it nests uniquely. Nests on a bare branch. No nest, zero. And the nests are often a little bit more than your finger. I mean, we're not talking big limbs, we're talking little branches. It lays its egg on the branch, and a chick has to hatch and somehow or another land on the branch, or it falls on the ground. Well, as I walked around, and the first thing I got on the island, by the way, I asked, well, is Chan still here? This is 1964, and he had just left a couple weeks earlier. Well, these little chicks, which were only about so big, already had bands on them. And I thought, how'd that happen, because Chan's gone. I mean, who's here to, So I got back on the ship, I penned a little note off to him, and it took the seagulls forever to deliver it, and the seagulls another couple of weeks before I finally got a reply back. I think we were probably somewhere in the Philippine Sea or South China Sea. At any rate, well, we've been banding these birds for so long that all we have to do is this is Chan's letter, obviously not verbatim. We just have to put the band on top of the egg, And as the chick comes out of the egg, and reaches down. So that was my first real communication with Chan. And I'm forever kicking myself that I didn't save that letter. I mean, I would have had it mounted, maybe even put it up here, I don't know. But I didn't, and then I had several other communications with him after that, but not face to face for the first time until spring of '68. We met at an Arizona meeting of ornithological interests, and we went out birding, and I showed him a couple of new owls, and among other birds, and we got there, became pretty good friends at that point. So since then, we've had a lot of communication, and I still lived in California for another 5 or so years, and anytime he came to the West Coast, one time I drove to Vancouver, BC for a winter January meeting from Southern California, and then he hopped on the car and rode back with me while we birded our way back to Southern California. And he only picked up, I think 6 or 8 live birds on that particular trip, including great gray owl, northern pygmy owl, tufted duck, I can't remember what else. So then I moved here at the bird banding lab for 5 years, then later downtown. And so we did a lot of field trips together. I actually never worked with Chan. I would like to recognize Deanna. Did you raise your hand? Back in the back there, one of his employees. Who else do we have that worked directly with Chan?
Jane Fallon.
Oh, Jane? Is Jane here?
Here.
Oh,
Right
good.
there.
Another Jane. I'm sorry, my vision is such that I can barely see the front row people. I mean, I can see people, but I can't see faces. My apologies.
David Holmes.
Oh, David?
Yep.
Oh, I didn't see David. Okay, David Holmes.
Your left.
So we have a handful of folks who actually worked directly with Chan here. Let's see. Chan had 1.5 million projects in his lifetime. I mean, maybe 1.2 million. At any given time, he was juggling half a dozen, right then, one day, half a dozen different projects. Somebody's doing this count here, setting up something over there, and then he himself would be doing something in the morning before he went to work, or things of that sort. So boundless energy, just boundless energy, and great ideas on how to count birds, identify birds, things of that sort. So I can't begin to list those 1.2 million, or we'd be here till tomorrow, or maybe even the next day. So let me just go through just a handful of some of the major ones that he did. Probably the first one the most important one, the contribution that he made, was the breeding bird survey, started in 1966 here in the East. And I know David and I don't know if Jane helped on some of those early ones, routes, and then he moved them to the West a couple of years later, where I still was, and I started doing some out on the West Coast. But this is the only way that non-game birds are being indexed, populations, trends are being measured in North America. And it's a really fantastic study that's still, hopefully, going to continue. I won't get into the details of the survey because I think most of the folks here are familiar with the BBS. At a much later date, in the early 80s, he brought over from the United Kingdom the Breeding Bird Atlas project, where the particular region would be gridded off. He used our USGS quadrangles and divided them up into 6 quadrants, or 6/10, I don't know what you would call them, but at any rate, and that was our grid for Maryland, and I think the first one was 83, somewhere along in that line, and eventually we just finished one a year and a half ago of the latest, the third major atlas for the state of Maryland. How many people participated in that atlas? See, almost half the people here. So I don't need to really describe too much, but getting the breeding bird of each block, each little thing listed is an important thing for looking at trends of both habitat loss, urbanization, but also range expansion or loss. The ravens are, as you know, are expanding to the east. Some birds are coming up from the south. Some birds are retreating now that used to be here, no longer here. So breeding bird atlas, very important. One of his long-term fun events was a Christmas bird count. I think his first one was like 1936. Does that sound right? About right, Jane? 38? Somewhere. Before I was born. I don't remember it. But in the middle 40s, shortly after the war, he was part of the small team cadre that helped standardize it. Up until then, for 45 years or so, the counts have been willy-nilly. I mean, really willy-nilly. Some would be 2 or 3 days long. Some would cover a whole county. Some only a little city park. There was just no standardization, no recording of effort, whether they spent 1 hour or 100 hours counting those particular birds. So he helped get that standardized, and that has been the standard ever since, with only a few kind of small tweaks ever since. He himself had been on over 400, I believe it was, 420 Christmas bird counts himself. There's only like one other person who's been on more counts than that. So, Christmas bird counts. And I was on quite a few of those. How many were on Christmas bird counts that Chan participated on? See, again, half the people here. I don't know why I'm repeating all this. You folks know more of this than I do. He in later years, Deanna was about 1985 or so. He started going to Latin America, somewhere in the 80s, I believe. Started going to Latin America, not only to measure the bird populations down there, but really, most importantly, to get the locals educated in bird study, bird banding, and infuse them with the idea that here's your resource. You need to study it. You need to protect it. And I don't know how many countries you must have gone to. At least 20 or so. Is that a lot? Deanna was part of that effort. In the middle 50s, I'm sorry, I'm not doing this in chronological order, not just the order I put them down. In the middle 1950s, 1956, he helped start Operation Recovery, which had the goal of banding birds in, say, New England, and then recapturing them a few days or a week or two later somewhere along the Atlantic coast. That was the concept that they originally started with. Well, they banded millions and millions of birds over the next 15, 20 years, and we could count on maybe a couple of hands the number of direct recoveries, banded in Massachusetts, found in North Carolina, or something like that, or made in the same migration season. Very small number. But the tremendous amount of information that was garnered from aging and sexing and weights and measurements, and when did the birds move through? The yellow rump warblers would come towards the end. Some of the other birds would start at the beginning in migration. Cerulean warblers were practically gone by the time they really started banding in early September. So that was a major project. One of his other big studies was on forest defragmentation. Actually, this could be applied to any habitat, whether it's wetland, grassland, but as it gets smaller and smaller, the number of robins or sparrows or whatever we're talking about can inhabit that particular thing. Some species require very large tracts for just a couple of pairs, even though they're small birds. Worm-eating warbler, 100 acres. That's why we don't see worm-eating warblers around here very often, because we don't have many tracts of 100-acre forests still left that also aren't eaten by the other part that he discovered. The deer eat the understory, and so the wood thrushes, the ovenbirds, Kentucky warblers, hooded warblers, things of that nature were all declining dramatically because the deer population mushroomed after World War II. You have to remember in the late 1800s, early 1900s, the population of deer for the state of Pennsylvania, admittedly I don't have anything from Maryland, was the total population of white-tailed deer was estimated to be about 1,000. 1,000. That many are being killed on the road every day in Pennsylvania now. So you can imagine that's a big herbivore. It has to eat a lot. You know, we're not talking small voles and other small rodents that might eat. So that was one of his big outcomes back in the 70s and 80s was forest defragmentation, or just fragmentation. That small patches of woods may not have any wood thrushes, or, well, especially if we had deer, things of that sort. I thought that was really a major contribution to our knowledge on bird conservation. Now we come to the really more fun parts. I was already mentioned in the middle 1956, he was invited by the Navy to go to Midway to help them figure out why the albatrosses kept coming back to the same spot and they kept hitting them with their aircraft. Which, you know, 20-pound bird hitting your aircraft, and the aircraft is moving at 100 or 150 knots, well, that becomes a bit of a problem. So while he was there, he started banding the birds. And over the next roughly 10 years, he banded almost 100,000 birds on Midway. He and his crew. Getting back to my little fairy turn, he had a couple of Navy personnel who volunteered to band the birds. That's how that, I should have answered how did those little baby turds all come out. The bands, I was pretty sure they didn't stick their hand through the eggshell. Or their paw. Their foot. Paw. Where am I in? At any rate, one of those Laysan albatrosses he rediscovered in 2002 was still there. He rebanded it because the band was getting pretty thin and worn, and named it Wisdom. Now, if that bird comes back in a couple of weeks, which it might, because they come back in early November on Midway, I don't think it might be back even today, but I sort of a little early. It will be at least 75 years old. Now, that's not the oldest bird on Midway. It's not the oldest Laysan albatross, which nests on several other big atolls in the Central Pacific. It's not the oldest albatross. It will be the oldest bird, period, in the wild in the world. So that's a pretty impressive bird. I hope Wisdom comes back again this year. At the time it was banded, it was at least 5 years old. It could have been already 10 or 15. Nobody knows. It was already at the stage where it was clearly a mature adult. Sort of as a side note, or not a side note, down at Patuxent when he was there in the 40s and 50s, he was helping with some of the other studies, and he marked a eastern box turtle. And it was found as recently as, I think, Deanna, do you know, 2010? Somewhere along in there. It was rediscovered, still present. And it only had a territory about the size of that parking lot and this parking lot. That's about all the bigger area this eastern box turtle was ever found in. And when it was found, it already was at least 20 years old. Again, could have been 30 or 40, who knows, or 70 already. So it was another 75-year-old animal. Not too many people could claim they have the oldest bird in another, as well as another animal in another totally different group on their resume. So good for the box turtle. Chan and I went out and looked for it again about 2013, 2014. We drove down to the spot at Patuxent where it was last seen, and we poked around, but the weeds were pretty thick. And I don't know if you ever started looking for box turtles, they're not easy sometimes to find. So it still could have been there.